So as Chris mentioned, I had the great pleasure of being the closing keynote the very first year that this happened. And about 2 weeks before that, Chris, we had never actually talked about what I was going to talk about. So Chris just decided to give it a title and put it on the website. And I looked at the website and I saw that it said, Jonathan Fields shares his greatest work ever. So I thanked Chris because that didn't put any pressure on me whatsoever. And then, we had the conversation about me coming back and sharing some time with you guys this year. And again, we just kind of never talked about what the talk would be or the title would be. So again, about 2 weeks ago, I looked at the website and noticed that Chris added in a new title. Jonathan Fields will reveal his greatest work ever again. So that was an amazing time. It was an incredible gathering. And as we kind of hung out in the room in the art museum, really right across the park, at the end of this, because I was the closer, we had a bunch of other speakers come up on stage and join me, and we had a little panel, and we passed a mic around the audience. And as the audience was asking questions, we would hang out, and they would kind of, say all sorts of interesting things, and the conversation was deep and rich, and I felt like the exchange was just so tight between all of us. And I really relished that time. But it was at the very end of that conversation that somebody asked a question that kind of changed things and made this moment stay in my mind. And the question was, what inspires you? And when they asked that question, the mic started down on the end in Jody's hand over there, who's apparently thinking about pizza. And she answered, and as everybody's kind of coming up with the questions, I'm thinking to myself, what inspires me? And I kept looking over to the right corner of the stage. And the reason I was doing that is because on that corner was a little monitor. And on the monitor sat a little drawing. And that drawing was actually a heart. And the heart was drawn by my then 9-year-old daughter and given to me before I came. And I just kept looking at it and looking at it and looking at it. And when the mic came to me, I couldn't really talk because I was looking at this and I was saying, you know what, this is what inspires me. This is who inspires me. I knew that no matter what happened on that stage, no matter if I bombed, if I was funny, whatever happened, that heart, what was behind it, was what mattered. And I kept coming back to that, and that was a huge inspiration for me. The knowledge that I have my family, that I have my kid, and that will always be there, and that's the heartbeat. That's the heartbeat of everything that I do. And what's interesting to me is that Chris mentioned, we've grown this incredible community ourselves at Good Life Project. That moment was, in an interesting way, the genesis of Good Life Project, because it brought me deeper into what we're doing and the exploration of what does it really mean to live a good life? What are the pieces of that puzzle? And it kicked off this quest that sent me traveling around the world, searching for what I call embodied teachers, people who don't just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And that quest took on a life of its own. Over time, a period of years, I had the opportunity to sit down with so many people, literally hundreds of people from around the world, everything from the leaders of tremendous philosophical and theological lineages to people who were just kind of living every day but had something incredibly powerful to share. And from that, I started to see patterns. A huge data set appeared. And I noticed that the people who seemed to really be living extraordinary lives all brought themselves to the world in particular ways. And I started to see what I call the 5 Bs, these consistent ways that people are in the world when they really are leaning into life. And that's what I'd love to share with you today. So I'm going to walk through those with you, if that's cool with you. Just making sure. I mean, we can just hang out and jam if you want, but if you're interested, I'm totally down with the 5 Bs. So one of the things that I discovered really early on, and tell me if you've ever experienced this, but we have a tendency to wake up And the first thing we do is start checking stuff. And then from like every moment, it's just me, right? It's not, oh, there's like 2 other people that do that too? Right. So every moment, from the moment we open our eyes to the moment we like lay our head down in bed at night, we're maniacally busy, right? Constantly checking stuff off and doing things, right? I actually have a name for this. Death by 1,000 to-dos, right? And here's the thing. We're maniacally busy, but we're actually not busy doing the things that matter. We've moved into a place where in life we spend so much of our time being busy and reactive in the name of being busy and reactive. Not only are we filling every moment of our day with the stuff that we don't choose, but we're filling every moment of our day with the stuff that other people choose to be important for us. That's not how people who live good lives live. So one of the things that I found is that busyness is actually a symptom of surrender. It's not a badge of honor. When you answer busy to somebody who says, "How are you?" you need to stop and think about why you're saying that. I need to stop and think about why I'm saying that. And I've caught myself saying it recently. And I'm like, this is not how you live a good life, right? I've actually coined a phrase called reactive life syndrome, and I think a lot of us suffer from it. We're maniacally busy with other people's agendas, right? And what I realize is a good life is created. It's not awaited. It's not given to. You don't just kind of like surrender and have people give it to you. You actually do something. A good life is about acting, not reacting. And that's the first B. The first B that's common among all these people who are living extraordinary lives is that they're intentional. Being intentional about the way you spend your time on the planet is one of the most important things you can do. When it comes to living a good life, you choose or you lose. So that brings us to the second B. And this kind of came to me more recently. This is a picture of a kid named Days. Now, has anyone actually ever heard of Days? Probably not. So here's the deal. His real name is Chris Ellis. But nobody really knows him by his real name if you know him at all. The reason is that Days grew up in New York City in the 70s, and this was a bad time in New York City. The city was bankrupt, there was tons of crime all over, and he was part of a graffiti crew. He basically spent all of his days dodging a special squad of police who were brought into New York City to try and take care of this. And he was running around, and it was all about defiance. It was about revolution. It was about painting trains and graffitiing trains. But at some point, Days realized that what he saw purely as an expression of defiance was actually an expression of art for him also. He saw that this thing wasn't just contained to painting trains, to, quote, vandalism, but to him bringing what was in his heart out. And he'd made the choice that he was willing to actually move beyond running from the cops and painting trains to actually moving into a studio and painting canvases, bigger and bigger canvases. So this picture actually appears on the wall now of a museum in New York City. His art has been collected and is posted in some of the largest museums in the world and some of the biggest collectors in the world. And that all happened because at some point, Chris Ellis realized that he had to be open to something other than the narrow confines of what he thought he was here to do. That it wasn't about defiance, it wasn't about graffitiing trains, it wasn't about rebellion running from the cops, it was about his own artistry moving out into the world. It was about creating a conversation with other people through what was in his heart. And while a lot of people in his crew were like, no, this is about staying with the crew and doing what you need to do, he made the leap. He's one of the few guys that made the leap from that time in the 70s, from graffitiing trains to becoming an extraordinary, well-known studio artist. So what you learn is that when you open to possibility, the world really becomes your playground. In fact, fortune favors the open. There's some really fun research around this. Richard Wiseman, who's a psychologist and researcher, took a group of people, actually 2 groups. One self-identified as being really lucky, and the other as being really unlucky. And he gave them a newspaper, and he told them, count the pictures in the newspaper. Now here's the deal. The people who are lucky counted 43 pictures in a matter of seconds. The people who were unlucky took about 3-4 minutes and came up with 43 pictures also. So what's the deal there? So the deal is this. About 2 or 3 pages into that newspaper, in huge block letters, half of the page said, "Stop counting, there are 43 pictures in this newspaper." The people who saw that went and told the proctor, "Dude, I got it." The proctor then went, "Oh, that's great. Go back and keep reading a little bit more." So they went and they sat down and they read a little bit more. And about 3 pages after that, it said, "Stop reading, go tell the proctor, and you'll get 150 pounds. Right? Now, the interesting thing is the people who identified as lucky, for the most part, saw this. The people who identified as unlucky completely missed it. The reason is they were so narrowly focused on the task and only the task, the constraints and limitations that they assumed into existence that they couldn't see possibility. They weren't open to anything more. People who really lean into life and live good lives are open. They're open to possibility. They're open to experience in a way that frees them from limitations. So have fun. Go try things. This is me and my friend Scotty in Costa Rica shortly before doing a zip line course. Do I look a little bit terrified there? Yeah, does the helmet look a little bit small for my head too? Right, so try experiences. Try weird things that you think are just going to be really bizarre. And most importantly, don't ever apologize for being open, because when you are open, people around you will be uncomfortable by that. And let that be their thing, not your thing. Right? So that brings us to the third B. Now this, kind of like I was thinking about so many ways I've experienced this, and I was recently thinking about a moment a couple years back, it's actually a number of years back now. I was in New York City, kind of a coldish day, and I was in my local post office. And I was, like, I don't know if everyone's ever been in a post office in New York City, or who's been in New York City? Just clap for a second. Good. Rule number 1, you don't look people in the eye. Right? Which also happens to be the exact opposite rule in Portland. Right? In Portland, like, everyone thinks the New Yorkers are just these evil, sort of like people who don't want anything to do with each other, and we think Portlanders are freaks who just want to talk all the time. We're nice people, really. It's just the rules on the street. So I'm in the post office, there's a long line, and I'm looking down, because that's what we do, right? Moving slowly and kind of grumpy. It's a gray day out. I do my thing, I head out, and I'm pushing through the doors on the top of the steps, and there's a little lobby area in the middle. And there's another set of doors and some steps outside. And I look up for just a moment, and I see there's a kid there, maybe 9, 10 years old, wearing a little blue blazer from his school. And he's hanging out, and he has a box of chocolates. Right? He looks up, and he's like, "Would you buy chocolate for my school?" Now, normally, my response at that point especially was, no, busy, got to move on. Something inside of me said, you know what? I feel like I need a little bit of a hit to my karma today. So I said, sure, right? Handed him $1, grab a piece of chocolate, everything's good, throw it in my pocket, push through the next set of doors, and I'm walking down the steps. And as I just start at the top of the steps, I see down at the bottom of the steps, there's an older gentleman, maybe late 70s, silver hair. He's just leaning on a cane like this, right? Now, I'm not looking at him because, as we already established, I'm a New Yorker. So I'm kind of looking, anywhere but him. But as I start to take steps towards him, I'd have to kind of go around him to go where I'm going. I notice he's just leaning on his cane, looking straight at me. And I'm like, this is weird. Right? And I'm walking a little bit closer. And as I get closer to him, he starts to smile. And now he's smiling at me. And this is really weird. Right? As I get a little bit closer, his hand starts to come up. He's leaning on the cane, smiling at me. His hand starts to come up, and he's pointing, and I'm like, what? He's not pointing at me. He's pointing up inside the doors. And as I get close enough to him, he looks at me, and he says, "It's my grandson. Thank you." And I literally nearly burst into tears in that moment. Right? And the rest of the day for me was the most amazing day, because something changed. This wasn't a big thing. I didn't go and build something substantial. There was a moment where I just decided to be generous. I did it for me, truth told, because I felt like I needed the hit that day. And what I realized is that in that moment, when we give, when we're kind, when we're generous, it changes everything. And as a guy especially, very often we're taught that. Does anyone recognize this shirt, by the way? Part of our Gleeper crew. Created by Sweet Baby Kyle, as we know him. Yeah, especially as men, we're very often taught, don't be kind, don't be generous, don't be just open and giving, especially to strangers, because it's a sign of weakness, right? But it's actually a sign of grace. It's a sign of presence. It's a sign of being here to live well and give well, right? So there's really powerful research around this too. Adam Grant, a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, has done all this beautiful research that says that when you give, he measured givers and takers, right? Givers actually win. They're more successful most of the time, right? So if you actually want to do it just because it's for you, that's awesome. Do it because it also makes a difference in the world, and that's amazing too, right? And Adam also documented, along with a bunch of other people, that givers actually, when we give, it changes our physiology. It literally changes the chemistry that we have in our body. And there's a phenomenon called giver's glow. So when we give, it literally makes us glow from the inside out. And that experience, that shift in mood and physiology, it stays with us not just in the moment that we're giving, but sometimes for days. Really, really, really powerful. So by this simple act of giving, we can actually make a difference in other people's lives, and we can make a real difference in our own lives. And that's the third B. So many people, almost universally, who I've seen who really are embodying this ideal of living a good life, they bring themselves to the world with kindness, Another really important part of this is also I've found to surround yourself with people who are kind. So this is my wife, Stephanie. She's also my partner in business, my partner in life. This is a shot that I took at the end of camp last year. And I took it because I was like, wow, look at the blazing sun coming through the trees over there. It's like Stephanie's in the shot too. And then I looked at the shot. And I'm like, wow, that sun's really bright. And I'm like, but look at the radiance coming off my wife. Like, she's one of the kindest, most generous people in the world. My Gleepers know that, right? So surround yourself with people like that. When we build our team, right? This is Christopher Carter, Cynthia Morris, and Laura Neff, part of our team. Amazingly kind people. When you surround yourself with people who are just innately kind, it's astonishing how good your life becomes. And if you really want to shorthand this, if you just want like the perfect standard to know when you're being kind or not, it's really simple. Be the person your dog thinks you are. These are badass New York dogs, by the way. This is how dogs roll in New York. Which brings us to the fourth B. And this is something that came to me in a conversation actually with Elizabeth Gilbert, who many of you know from her many books, who's an extraordinary human being. And I had the opportunity to spend some time with her, and we spent an hour recording a conversation. And during this hour, something happened in the room. It was kind of interesting because I felt it, but I didn't know whether I just felt it. And then that was one of the conversations when we aired it. It got tremendous, and a lot of people were like, what happened there? And I couldn't figure it out either. So I literally took the audio from that and had it transcribed because I couldn't figure out what was going on. And it wasn't until I actually saw the print on the page that I understood what had happened. So literally, every minute of a 60-minute conversation, the transcriber had bracketed a single word. And that word is laughs. So what I realized was that Liz was unapologetically joyful. Literally, she couldn't stop cracking herself up. Because, as you may have known, like kind of been aware right now, I'm not that funny. Right? And so the question is, like, how could one person be so just unapologetically joyful? And I was trying to figure out, and then I realized, took a step back, I'm like, what's really happening here? And I realized there was actually something much bigger going on, something that I've seen in Liz, in Brene Brown, and so many other people, where people just radiate towards them, and they're like living these extraordinary lives. And it's this: before you can be unapologetically joyful, you've got to be unapologetically you. Right? New York City subway, by the way. Legitimate shot. This is how we roll. So I realized that so many of us try and be happy. We try and put on a happy face. We reverse engineer our way into being joyful. But until that moment comes where we step into who we actually legitimately are in the world, we will always be carrying the weight of the facade, of the mask of somebody else. And as much as we can access joy, we will never fully access it because we are not fully ourselves. The moment we stand in ourselves is the moment that we lay the foundation to really be unapologetically joyful. Does that make sense to you? Yeah. So I thought about my own past here. Right? Me and Ben were like, we did have hair at one point in our lives. Yeah, so when I was a kid, there was a chunk of time where I was Freaky Fields, because I was a different kid. I was a different kid. I saw the world differently, I thought differently, I behaved differently, and I was always really, I didn't want to bring that part of myself to the world. And then I said, you know what? As I got a little bit older, I started to realize I need to step into myself more. I need to step into myself a little bit more. I need to bring that part of me to the world that is just me. And the more I did that, what I realized is the more that the world rose up and embraced me. The more I could go from that place of being me and being joyful. And the more I developed a voice that was distinct as a writer, as an artist, as a creator, as a producer, and just as a human being. And that is when stuff started to change, not when I wore the weight of being somebody else. So the big thing here is to be you. You've got to be you, because that is the foundation for being joyful. There is, of course, one exception to almost every rule. Right? If you have the opportunity to be a unicorn, you may actually want to choose that, at least for a short term. So which brings us to the fifth B here. And this is like the root B. This is the deeper thing. This is the heartbeat that allows these other four to actually happen. And that's this. It's that you can't be any of these until you're still. Until you're still. And we struggle with that so much because we live in a world and a society and a culture where we have essentially stripped the opportunities to be still from our lives, right? A couple of years ago, a friend, Scott Belsky, who founded Behance a chunk of time ago, wrote something where he said basically like the shower is the last bastion where you can be alone with your thoughts. I don't think that's even true anymore, right? How many people actually bring their phone into the bathroom and crank up the volume? Nobody here, but I've heard that it happens. Right? So here's the thing, right? Stillness cultivates awareness. Without awareness, how do you even know what kindness feels like or whether you're being kind? Without awareness, how do you even know what openness feels like or whether you're being opened? Right? How do you even know if you're being you? If you don't have the ability to zoom the lens out a little bit and actually see how you're being in the world. So moments of stillness, cultivating stillness in your life, that's the heartbeat of awareness. And that's what gives us the ability to zoom the lens out and then step back in, fully present, fully us, and know when we're not being that person so that we can make adjustments to who we are. So this is a dear friend of mine, Susan Piver, who's a beautiful writer and Shambhala meditation teacher. And she's also one of my meditation teachers. And she's one of the people who really brought the practice of mindfulness into my life. So my daily practice is a morning mindfulness practice. It's the thing where no matter where I go in the world, that starts my day, and it has profoundly changed my life. I actually came to my practice on my knees. I had a dirty little secret. For years, I had taught yoga. I owned Flourishing Yoga Center in New York City. I taught meditation, but behind the scenes, I wasn't really doing it myself, right? And there came a time in my life where I had to deal with some really big struggles. And the only way that I could get through it was by building a practice that allowed me to be still, to become aware, and to let go of the story that I was telling that kept me in a place of pain, and start to step into a different story, start to be intentional, start to choose differently. Susan's teacher, somebody named Sakyam Mipham Rinpoche, who I also had an amazing opportunity to sit down with, his name literally translates to Earth Protector, right? So you thought, like, when Chris told me the title of my talk, I felt a sense of responsibility? Right? And when I asked him, what does it mean to you to live a good life? His answer was to be brave. How do you know whether you're being brave or what bravery means if you don't actually have the ability to know how you're behaving in any moment in time? So 2 really powerful ways to cultivate this sense of stillness and awareness are a daily practice, which I shared with you, right? But there's something else, actually, that Sean McCabe, who some of you may know as Sean West. Anyone know Sean? Here, Sean? Yeah. So Sean started as a hand letter, and now he's building this really awesome media company. Sean started taking a 1-week sabbatical every 7 weeks. Every 7 weeks, he takes a week and he steps back from his work, and he just hits pause on everything. The first week that he was supposed to do it, he did his 7 weeks, and as it was coming up, he was saying to his wife, well, we're really busy here, there's a launch going on, we'll do it next time. But he realized that if he did that once, he would just give himself permission to do it forever. And he committed to it, and he has not stopped doing it. And he'll tell you that in those 1-week times where he steps back, where he hits pause for a week, it's where the magic of his life comes from. It's also where the energy, the ideas, the momentum comes to step back in. And during those 7 weeks, he gets more done probably than the average person does in 3 months, because he's so fulfilled and so aware and so present. So find a place of your own. A lot of people will find this in nature. That's one of my big reset spots. If you can't find it in nature, look for places local. Someone recognize this sign? It's at the Portland airport, by the way. New Yorkers notice stuff like this because, I'm not feeling too composed right now. I wish there was an area I could go. Oh, that's so awesome. We don't have stuff like this in New York, right? And then finally, if you can't find a place, the truth is, pretty much any place will do. Wherever you are, I have sat and meditated in almost every place in the planet. I was doing it outside in Portland a couple days ago, really early in the morning, with my hood on, and people were kind of running by and walking their dogs and pushing me, and I could literally feel their eyes on my back, like, what? Do it wherever you can do it. So what all this kind of circles back to, and what I've really come to believe, is that a good life is not a place at which you arrive. It's a lens through which you see and you create your world. We don't get there. It's not a place where someday we'll be. It's a choice we make now. It's a choice we make now. Question is, how will you be in the world? What will you choose as you choose to live, right? What lens will you put on as you move out into the world? So for me, that lens is this, right? That lens is this. It's the picture. That's the lens that I wear as I move into the world. These hearts, love on my sleeve. My invitation, maybe try putting that on too. Thank you.